Picture this: a city carved into the hills of Judah, basking in the dry heat of an unforgiving sun. Olive trees dot the slopes, stone walls shimmer like bleached bone. And at the center, rising above the chaos of life, stands the temple, its golden crown catching firelight from the sky, Jerusalem. To its people, it was more than a city. It was identity, covenant, proof of divine favor. They called it the city of peace. They called it the footstool of God, the place where heaven kissed the earth and angels still listened from behind veils. But behind its sanctified name, Jerusalem was fractured. Beneath the chants of psalms and offerings of incense, there were divisions, sharp, bleeding ones. Religious zealots against Roman collaborators. Priests corrupted by politics. Prophets ignored. The city was holy in name, but rotting in soul. And it is in such a city proud, chosen, diseased with denial, that judgment always begins. In 66 AD, the spark was lit. Roman taxes had bled the people dry. Insults against the temple mounted. A soldier burned a scroll of the law. A riot began. Then a rebellion. And for the first time in centuries, the people of Jerusalem believed deliverance had come. Jerusalem. The temple guard turned their weapons on the renowned garrison. Soldiers were slaughtered. Their blood ran down stone streets like water from an open jug. For the zealots, this was victory. For the priests, divine vengeance. For the people, prophecy fulfilled. But across the sea, in the marble halls of power, another man was watching. Vespasian. And with him, his son Titus. They didn't see prophecy. They didn't see God's chosen. They saw defiance, rebellion. A disease to be crushed before it spread. And so they came. Not with prayers, but with legions. And Jerusalem, so sure of its invincibility, so drunk on the memory of past miracles, did not realize that this time no miracle was coming. They came from the north. 4 Roman legions, each one trained not just in battle, but in the slow, systematic destruction of civilizations. 60,000 soldiers, engineers, architects of death, men who had seen Carthage turn to ash and who now looked upon Jerusalem with the same cold calculation. Titus was not yet emperor. He had not yet ruled the world. But his father, Vespasian, had given him a clear command: crush the rebellion, spare no stronghold, leave no legend behind. And so Titus marched through Galilee, through the outer regions of Judea, burning villages, leveling fortresses, driving survivors into the hills like rats chased from a dying barn. The countryside bled refugees. The roads pulsed with the footsteps of the condemned. And Jerusalem became a trap. By the time Titus encircled the city, it was Passover. Tens of thousands of pilgrims had flooded in, bringing with them families, livestock, and hope. They did not know they were walking into a grave. And the gates were sealed behind them, not by Romans, but by their own countrymen. Inside Jerusalem, the rebels had seized control. The zealots, fanatics armed with blades and dreams of apocalypse, believed that God would deliver them. That if they could just purge the impure, endure the trial, heaven would open its gates and send legions of angels. So they locked the gates, burned the food stores to keep others from surrendering, slaughtered their own priests, and waited. Outside the walls, Rome surrounded them, built ramparts, siege towers, walls to trap the trapped. Inside the walls, Jerusalem devoured itself, and all the while the people prayed. They prayed to the God who had once drowned Pharaoh's army, who had shattered Jericho's walls, who had fed them in the wilderness. But this time he was silent. No manna fell, no armies came, only hunger, the slow, creeping kind that turns flesh to parchment, that steals the cry from a baby's mouth and replaces it with stillness, that drives men to madness and mothers to murder. And still the temple stood. For now, at first it was a whisper, a gnawing emptiness, A rumble beneath the ribs, an ache that passed like weather. People rationed what they could, a handful of barley, a scrap of moldy bread. The lucky ones had dried figs or a sliver of salted fish. But even those ran dry within weeks. The gates remained closed. The Romans watched from the hills, and the sun, merciless and impartial, kept rising. Hunger does not remain a whisper for long. It screams. It twists. It breaks the bones of the proud and chews through the faith of the holy. Soon, people began boiling leather. Belts, sandals, even parchments from sacred scrolls turned to bitter broth. Others ate grass, leaves, the filth between cobblestones. Some sifted through dung for seeds that might have passed through unspoiled. It was no longer about food. It was about instinct. The hunger became a God merciless, all-consuming. And it demanded worship through desperation. But it didn't end there. As bodies weakened, another sickness crept in. Not from outside the walls, but from within. Men turned against men. Factions split. Rival Jewish groups battled each other in the streets. The zealots hunted those who pleaded for surrender. Blood ran in the temple courts. Brother killed brother. Fire consumed whatever was left. And amid this anarchy, the famine grew darker, more primal. Children disappeared in the night. Infants stopped crying, not from comfort, but from death. The sounds of Jerusalem, once filled with psalms and prayer, now echoed with something else. The scratching of fingers in the dirt, the hoarse gasps of mothers with no milk to give, and the quiet, terrifying stillness of thousands waiting for death. There were rumors, horrors spoken in whispers, that someone, somewhere, had done the unthinkable. No one wanted to believe it. Not yet. But hunger is patient, and in time, even the most sacred boundaries would be devoured. Her name was Mary. She was not a peasant. She was not a foreigner. She came from the noble house of Hyssop, a family once adorned with robes and oil and the scent of incense from temple courts. Her lineage could be traced back to priests, to honor, to purity, but now she lived in a ruin. Her home had been reduced to rubble, her belongings stripped by thieves, her neighbors starved or slaughtered. And in her arms she held her last possession, a child. Her son, Josephus the historian, would later write her story, not with flourish, not with metaphor, but with horror, the kind that burns itself into parchment like ash into skin. Mary had fled the countryside, like so many others. She believed Jerusalem would be her refuge, the temple her shield. But the city had become a tomb, and her faith a memory. She tried. At first, she begged the guards for bread. They struck her with the butt of a spear. She scoured the floor for crumbs. Others beat her to them. She tried to suck the dew from stone, but even the stones were dry. And still her child cried. He cried with a voice that pierced her bones, a sound that demanded a mother's comfort, a sound that refused to die, even when death had silenced everything else. Until one night it stopped. She had no food, no hope, no strength. But she had a fire, and she had a knife. No one knows the prayer she said before it happened. No one knows if she wept or screamed or sat silently, numb. Perhaps she still believed, somewhere deep in the marrow of her soul, that God was watching. Or perhaps that was the cruelest part, that he wasn't. That night, Mary killed her child. She roasted him. And when the scent drifted into the streets, sweet, sickening, unmistakably human others came to steal what they thought was food, and Mary looked them in the eyes and said the words that would haunt the world forever. I have eaten my son. The rest is for you. The word spread like rot through the city. I have eaten my son. The sentence echoed in alleys, in courts, in the ears of soldiers and priests and children whose innocence had already withered. Some screamed, others vomited, many simply stared. There was nothing left to say. Even the zealots, those fanatics who dreamed of divine fire and angelic armies, grew quiet. The heavens did not open. The temple did not thunder. No plague fell on the Romans outside. There were no miracles, only silence. Titus heard the tale. The Roman general who had carved his way through Judea with blood and iron trembled. Josephus, who stood at his side, recorded that Titus wept, that he called upon the gods to bear witness that this horror, this cannibalism, was not his doing, that he had offered mercy, surrender, escape, and still the gates had remained closed. But now, no gates could protect what was left. Jerusalem was not a city. It was a corpse with eyes still open. The temple burned. A fire started, some say by a soldier's torch, others say by fate. The sanctuary that had once housed the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy of Holies, the place where blood had been sprinkled for the sins of a nation, was engulfed in flames. The gold melted, the veils burned, the stone cracked with the heat. And as the fire consumed what was once sacred, the screams of the dying mixed with the silence of the divine. Jerusalem fell. More than 1 million were dead. 100,000 were taken as slaves. The roads leading away from the city were lined with crucified bodies. Trees had been stripped bare just to feed the machines of death. Nothing remained, except one thing: memory. The memory of a mother's hunger. The memory of a people who believed they could not fall until they were devouring their own children. We remember Mary not to condemn her, not even to understand her, but because she is what remains when every layer of faith, culture, and civilization is peeled away, and only desperation remains. She was not a monster. She was a mirror, and we look into it to see how far we could fall. If the gates ever closed, and God ever looked away, before the final torch was thrown, before the temple cracked and the holy city bled into dust, there was a war inside the walls. Not Roman against Jew, but Jew against Jew. Jerusalem was not united in its suffering. The famine had not drawn the people together. It had divided them, atomized them, turned them against one another like wild animals caged in too little space. There were 3 main factions. Simon Bar Giora, leader of the peasant militia, strong, brutal, a populist general crowned with stolen authority. John of Giscala, ambitious, cunning, ruthless. He controlled the temple and turned it into a fortress. And Eleazar, zealot to the core, keeper of the inner sanctum, whose followers believed that death in the name of purity was more glorious than life itself. They should have stood together, but they tore each other apart. John's men poisoned the water supplies to keep them from Simon. Simon's warriors set fire to the storehouses to keep them from John. Eleazar's zealots assassinated both sides when they could, claiming it was God's will. Fighting erupted in the streets. Every alley became a battlefield. Every corner of the holy city dripped with blood, not from invaders, but from brothers. Not from Gentiles, but from sons of Abraham. And the temple became a slaughterhouse. Animals no longer bled on the altar. Priests no longer offered sacrifices. Instead, rebels turned sacred vessels into weapons. Gold-plated bowls were used to catch human blood. The holy incense was choked by the stench of burning flesh. God's house became hell's vestibule. Outside the walls, Titus waited. He didn't need to breach the gates. Not yet. He just needed to wait, to watch them devour each other, to let famine finish what Roman blades had not yet begun. And inside, the people prayed, but no answer came. Not because heaven wasn't listening, but because they had already chosen long ago to kill each other instead. The cries of Jerusalem did not rise without warning. This horror, this famine, this fire, this silence had been foretold. Centuries before, a prophet walked the same streets. His name was Jeremiah. He had warned of Babylon, of siege, of exile. He had shouted in the courtyards of the temple itself, calling the people to repentance. He had begged them to turn from their idols, to stop shedding innocent blood, to break their pride before God broke their city. But they mocked him. They called him mad. They beat him. They threw him into a cistern and left him to die. And still he warned them. In one prophecy, his voice shook with sorrow. The hands of compassionate women have boiled their own children. They became their food in the destruction of the daughter of my people. Lamentations 4:10. He wasn't speaking metaphor. He was seeing forward. He was tasting the ashes of a future famine, smelling the burning flesh of a holy city gone mad. And now it had come again, because they had not learned. Because pride does not die quietly. Because the memory of judgment fades faster than the hunger of rebellion. Jesus of Nazareth, another prophet, another rejected voice, stood on the Mount of Olives decades before Titus arrived. He wept over Jerusalem, not with anger, but with grief. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. If only you had known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. He warned of siege, of famine, of a time when not one stone of the temple would be left upon another. They laughed at him. They crowned him with thorns. They crucified him just outside the city wall. And then they moved on, as if the future wasn't watching. But it was. And prophecy ignored, denied, delayed, is never erased. It waits. And when it returns, it devours. When the walls finally fell, there was no victory, only aftermath. The Roman legions surged into the city like a tide of blood, not as conquerors, but as witnesses to what was already dead. There were no cheers, no banners, no lines of soldiers to fight them off, just bones. Children huddled in chorus beside the corpses of their mothers, men with hollow eyes swinging rusted blades at phantoms. The smell of rotting flesh soaked into the very stones. Titus, who had once imagined a glorious siege, stood silent as his troops pulled gold teeth from the mouths of the fallen. They did not conquer Jerusalem. They found her already crucified. The temple was gone. The holy scrolls were ash. The Ark of the Covenant had long since vanished. And God's voice was silent. In time, the city would be rebuilt. Stones would rise again. Streets would fill. Markets would open. But the soul of Jerusalem, what had made her holy, was never fully recovered. Because a city can be rebuilt. But once a people have eaten their own children, something deeper has been broken. What happened in 70 A.D. is not just history. It is a warning that the collapse of a people does not begin when enemies arrive. It begins when truth is silenced, when pride trumps mercy, when the sacred is traded for power, when brother kills brother in the name of righteousness, and no one mourns. Mary of Hyssop will never be forgotten, not because she was wicked, but because she was human, a mother, a victim, a mirror held up to a world that thought itself chosen, and learned too late that no one is exempt from judgment. You can pray, you can build temples, you can quote prophets, but when the famine comes and the gates are shut, only what's truly inside you will remain.